I came home 3 hours early that Tuesday afternoon, my hands still smelling of pine wood and varnish from the Morrison order I'd been forced to reschedule. All I wanted was a quick sandwich, maybe the faint hum of Coltrane or Davis on the record player, the kind of ordinary rhythm that made a house feel steady. Instead, what I walked into was a betrayal so sharp it carved through 15 years of marriage in one breath. The front door gave its familiar groan as I nudged it open. Jenna didn't notice. She was in the kitchen, her voice low but edged with something venomous, the kind of tone I'd never heard directed at anyone but me. I froze in the hallway, close enough to see her silhouette leaning on the counter, phone pressed to her cheek. "I can't stand him anymore," she hissed, her words coated with contempt. "I wish Griffin would just vanish so I could be with Roland forever." I didn't stumble. I didn't slam the door. I didn't announce myself like a fool begging for scraps. Instead, I pulled my phone from my pocket, thumbed the record button, and held it steady. Every cruel syllable poured into that tiny microphone like poison into a vial. Her laugh, God, that laugh, twisted something in my chest. It wasn't the laugh I'd known. The one that used to pull me back from the edge during our worst fights or shine through the hospital waiting rooms during the years we tried and failed to have children. No, this laugh was sharp, practiced, meant for another man. "Roland." She lowered her voice, almost whispering, but I caught every word. "He's so boring, Roland. Always with his wood, his routines, his little shop. He has no idea what passion feels like. Sometimes I think he's already dead." My hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles burned white. The man she was describing wasn't me. It was a ghost she had sculpted, a hollow version of the man who had carried her bills, her heartbreak, her damned insecurities. She thought I was dead? She was wrong. That was the moment the husband in me died, and the man she underestimated finally woke up. I slipped back to the door, eased it shut, then opened it again, louder this time, like I just walked in after a normal day. Keys rattled. Boots hit the rug. "Babe," I called out, steady and warm. "You home?" The kitchen shuffle was immediate. The phone tucked away, a smile plastered on her face. She leaned in, kissed my cheek like nothing had passed through those lips moments before. "You're home early," she said. "Delivery canceled," I replied, brushing past her, pretending not to notice the faint tremor in her hands. "Figured I'd come back to the best part of the day." She beamed. I smiled back, and in that smile was the calmest rage I'd ever felt. Not the wild kind that burns out quick, but the slow, disciplined fire of a man who's just been handed absolute clarity. Dinner was soup, her grandmother's recipe. I ate it. We chatted about the weather, about her so-called yoga class later that evening. I even kissed her hand before she slipped out the door, her perfume trailing like a flag for a man who wasn't me. When she was gone, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the bowl empty, the silence heavy. I played back the recording once, twice, then a third time until her voice carved itself into me like a scar. "I can't stand him anymore. I wish Griffin would just vanish." She thought those words were casual cruelty whispered into the dark. She had no idea they were the spark of her undoing. By the time the front door closed behind her return that night, my plan had already begun to take shape. I wasn't going to scream, beg, or fight for scraps of her affection. No, she had wished me gone. I was going to give her exactly that, but not before making sure when I vanished, her entire world collapsed with me. That was the moment I stopped being her husband. From then on, I was her reckoning. The next morning, I woke before dawn like I always did. I brewed the coffee, scrambled the eggs, and buttered the toast. My hands went through the motions as if nothing had changed, but my mind was already somewhere else. Calculating, rearranging, stripping our life down to its foundations. When Jenna padded into the kitchen in her robe, rubbing sleep from her eyes, she was met with the same man she thought she knew, the husband who placed a steaming mug in front of her and kissed her hair like a ritual. "Morning, love," I said, steady as oak. She smiled back, unaware she was dining with a ghost of routine, not a husband. The act had begun. For 3 weeks, I played the role to perfection. Every day, I made noise at the door before stepping inside so she'd never suspect I'd once heard her venom. Every evening I asked about her yoga workshops, pretending I believed her stories of deep breathing and downward dogs, when I knew damn well Roland was the real instructor. I left love notes tucked into her yoga bag, sticky notes shaped like hearts. I made sure her favorite wine was chilled on Fridays. I even bought her tulips one random Tuesday, the kind of small gesture that makes women think they're adored. And the trick worked. She floated lighter every day, humming around the kitchen, her laughter spilling like cheap champagne. Her texts buzzed nonstop, the smile she tried to hide whenever Roland sent her a digital scrap of attention. To her, it was freedom finally arriving. To me, it was rope she was happily tightening around her own neck. At night, I studied with her. She thought she was clever, hiding her phone under the yoga mat in the hall closet, slipping it face down onto the nightstand when she crawled into bed. I'd lie there, steady breathing, eyes closed, letting her believe she was undetected. But I noticed everything. The late-night glow of her screen, the whispered giggles, the way she turned her body away from me as if I was a stranger. What she didn't notice was the shift in me. She saw the coffee, the tulips, the smile, and thought I was still her domesticated craftsman, the puppy she'd grown tired of. She didn't see the hours I spent in the shop after dark, sketching not furniture designs but the outline of a plan. She didn't see the calls I made on my lunch breaks, muted and efficient, laying the bricks of her downfall. I became two men, the husband she thought she controlled, and the man she didn't know existed. One Saturday morning, she pranced into the kitchen wearing new jewelry, an emerald pendant I hadn't bought. She twirled it between her fingers, waiting for me to ask, to challenge, to give myself away. I didn't. "Pretty," I said simply, sipping my coffee. Her shoulders dropped with relief, a little smirk flickering across her lips. She thought I was blind. She thought Roland's gifts were slipping past me unnoticed. I let her keep thinking that because the moment she believed she was winning, I knew my victory would be absolute. It wasn't easy keeping the mask in place. Every time she laughed into her phone, every time she slipped out late with perfume heavy on her neck, the rage flared hot in my chest. But I swallowed it, pressed it down into something sharper. Controlled anger is a tool, and I intended to wield it like a craftsman's chisel. Precise, patient, devastating. I remember one night in particular. She came home past midnight, hair disheveled, eyes bright, and slipped into bed smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't mine. She curled against me like nothing was wrong. My heart hammered in my chest, and for a second the urge to shove her away, to scream, to demand, nearly took me. But I didn't. Instead, I let her head rest on my chest, and I stared at the ceiling until dawn, my anger cooling into steel resolve. That was when I knew for certain I wasn't just going to leave her. I was going to erase her comfort, her arrogance, the safety net she thought would catch her. She wanted me gone. Fine. But when I disappeared, I'd take every brick of the life she stood on with me. By the end of those 3 weeks, Jenna believed she was living in a storybook. She thought she had Roland's love, my blind devotion, and the world waiting to bend around her whims. She had no idea that every smile I gave her, every kiss on her cheek, every "I love you" whispered before sleep was nothing more than camouflage. She thought she was free. What she didn't know was that the game had already begun, and she was the only one who didn't know the rules. The first call I made wasn't to a lawyer. It was to blood. My younger brother Brent had moved out to Colorado years ago, carving a career as a realtor who specialized in quiet, off-market deals. Brent knew how to move property without gossip leaking into neighborhood barbershops or yoga studios. Exactly the skill I needed. He answered on the second ring. "Griff, is everything all right?" "Not really," I said, my voice even. "I need the house sold. Cash only. No listings, no open houses. Quiet." There was a long pause. Brent didn't ask why, he trusted me too much for that. But his tone shifted. "How fast are we talking?" "As fast as you can pull a rabbit out of a hat." Another pause, then, "Send me the details. I'll handle it." That was Brent. Reliable as a steel hammer, no judgment, no second-guessing. By the time Jenna was off at another yoga session, I had scanned and sent him every deed, Every photo, every floor plan. The house that she thought was her fortress was already halfway to being someone else's. My second call was to Eli Jacobs. Eli and I had been friends since our high school football days. He'd gone on to trade shoulder pads for law books, eventually becoming one of the sharpest divorce attorneys in Boise. Ruthless was the word people used for him, and they weren't wrong. I'd seen him dismantle men who thought they could walk away clean, men who underestimated him the way Jenna underestimated me. He picked up on the first ring. "Whitmore," he barked, still calling me by my last name like we were running drills. "Eli, I've got a problem. Marital or financial?" "Both," I explained in clipped sentences, the kind of rundown you give a man who doesn't need the backstory, just the facts. Her words, the recording, Roland, the gifts, the late nights. Eli didn't interrupt, he just let out a low whistle when I finished. "Send me the audio," he said. "And Griffin? Stop sleeping under the same roof as her, at least in your head. From this moment, she's the opposition." That hit me harder than I expected. Opposition. Not my wife. Not a partner. Just the other side of a war. I emailed him the file before the call ended. Within an hour, he texted back, "Bulletproof. We'll bury her." The third step wasn't a call, it was a camera. My workshop had always been a sanctuary, a place where cedar and cherrywood became tables and chairs under my hands. Every piece I'd ever built was cataloged in my memory, but now I started cataloging them in photographs. Wide shots, close-ups, stamped signatures on the undersides. Each one bore my mark, my craftsmanship, my legal property. I spent hours doing this, moving like a museum curator through my own creations. Jenna none the wiser. She thought she could claim half of everything in a divorce. She didn't realize that the very wood grain testified to me, not her. Those photos became my shield, each image a nail in the coffin of her imagined victory. Meanwhile, Jenna kept humming. I kept smiling, kept texting under that yoga mat like a teenager hiding notes from her parents. One evening, while she laughed into her phone in the living room, I sat in the shop photographing the oak dining table we'd shared meals on for a decade. The irony wasn't lost on me. She thought Roland's love was feeding her, but it was still my table beneath her plates. Brent called back after a few days. "Got a buyer lined up. Cash verified. You'll need to sign quickly if you want to move before anyone catches wind." "Line it up," I told him. "You're not going to tell Jenna?" "No." He exhaled slowly. "Damn, Griff. You're really doing this." "I'm not doing anything," I said flatly. She did. Eli too kept pace. He sent me updates every evening, draft agreements, strategy notes, lists of items to secure. "Keep receipts," he said. "If she's taking gifts, we'll classify them as fraudulent transfers. Judges eat that alive." So I did. Every necklace, every bracelet, every pair of designer shoes Roland bought her, I photographed. I built a digital archive that would one day choke her with her own arrogance. At night, lying beside her, I no longer felt the need to reach for her hand or listen for her breathing. Instead, I counted the steps of my plan like a carpenter counting nails in a box. Everything is in order. Everything is ready. And still, the mask never slipped. I kissed her goodnight. I poured her coffee in the morning. I smiled when she flashed her new jewelry. She thought she was pulling off the greatest secret of her life. In truth, she was living inside the calm before her own storm. By the time those 3 weeks ended, I had a buyer waiting on the house, a lawyer loading ammunition, and a catalog of every asset that could be nailed to my side of the line. Jenna thought she was building a future with Roland. What she didn't see was the scaffolding around her life. Every beam loosened, every bolt unscrewed. She thought she had time. But time was the one thing I had already stolen. Jenna was glowing. That's the only word for it. She walked lighter, as if each step was a rehearsal for the new life she thought was waiting. Some mornings she hummed while making coffee. Other days she wore makeup just to sit at the kitchen table scrolling through her phone. She was blossoming, but not for me. One night she came home late, cheeks flushed, a new gold bracelet glinting under the kitchen light. She set her keys down with a deliberate clatter, waiting for me to notice. I did, of course. I noticed everything. But instead of asking where it came from, I smiled and said, "Looks good on you." Her relief was visible, almost pitiful. She thought she'd fooled me. She thought Roland's gifts were invisible, hidden under the veil of her lies. What she didn't know was that I'd already photographed the bracelet, cataloged it alongside the emerald pendant, and the designer handbag that still smelled of store polish. Every trinket she accepted was another nail in her coffin, proof of a fraudulent affair financed by someone else's wallet. Her lies became almost theatrical. Yoga workshops turned into late-night practice sessions. She'd step into the house flushed and trembling, then launch into some half-baked story about deep breathing techniques or meditation chants. I'd nod, sip my beer, and tell her how proud I was of her dedication. Each word I gave her was a rope, and she tied the knots herself. The cruelest part was how beautiful she thought she was becoming. She looked in the mirror longer, tried on clothes she hadn't worn in years, spun in front of me like a teenager desperate for validation. "Do I look good in this?" she'd ask, biting her lip. I'd smile and say yes, always yes. The better she felt, the harder the fall would crush her. Meanwhile, I became a shadow in the background, smiling, nodding, steady. She thought I was blind to her transformation, when in truth I was archiving it in silence. The photos stacked up in neat folders. Roland's jewelry, Roland's dresses, Roland's perfume. Every fraudulent purchase became a weapon, a reminder that her arrogance was painting her into a corner she wouldn't escape. I remember one Saturday afternoon when she pranced into the kitchen wearing a silk scarf, bright red, knotted around her neck like a flag. She brewed herself tea, humming off-key, then asked me to pass the honey. The scarf still had the tag tucked under the fold. I passed the jar, smiled, and asked her about her class. She launched into some nonsense about core strengthening while tugging the tag free. I didn't laugh. I didn't sneer. I just smiled, nodding as if I believed her. That's when I realized the depth of her blindness. She wasn't just lying to me anymore. She was lying to herself. Every evening, she thought she was slipping further into freedom, into Roland's arms, into a life without the boring craftsman she mocked. Every evening, I tightened the noose, quietly, patiently, with the precision of a man who knew exactly where each knot belonged. And still, she never saw it. She never questioned why I was so calm, why I never pressed her about the gifts, why I never snapped when she came home smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't mine. She mistook my silence for weakness. She thought I was still the husband who'd bend, who'd beg, who'd stay. But I wasn't that man anymore. Her happiness was fake, borrowed, built on lies and stolen hours. Mine was real, though she couldn't see it yet. The satisfaction of knowing that her freedom was a mirage, and the moment she reached for it, it would dissolve into dust. So I smiled. I poured her wine. I complimented her earrings. And with every gesture, I carved another inch off the ground she stood on. Jenna thought she was soaring. What she didn't know was that I'd already cut her wings. Closing day came quiet, without thunder, without warning. Jenna was upstairs, humming as she packed her yoga mat for another class that didn't exist. She thought she was preparing for freedom. In truth, I was signing the last line that cut her anchor loose. The buyer met me at Brent's office downtown. Cash offer, no contingencies, keys exchanged in less than an hour. The house wasn't mine anymore. It wasn't hers either. It belonged to strangers who didn't know or care about the life we'd lived within its walls. That suited me just fine. When I pulled back into the driveway, I didn't linger. I didn't look at the garden I'd planted or the porch swing I'd built with my own hands. Nostalgia is for men who plan to stay. I was already gone. Inside, I moved quickly. 12 boxes, clothes, tools, photos worth keeping, already staged in the garage. I loaded them into the truck one by one, steady as a man clearing lumber from a job site. No hesitation, no second thoughts. Each box was a piece of me reclaimed from a house that had become nothing but a lie. On the kitchen island, I left the manila envelope. Divorce papers, signed and notarized. A flash drive with the recording of her voice. I can't stand him anymore. I wish Griffin would just vanish so I could be with Roland forever. And on top of it, one line written in my hand. Consider your wish granted. I stood there for a moment, staring at those words. 15 years of marriage reduced to a single sentence and a stack of documents. There was no satisfaction in it, not yet. Just clarity. By mid-afternoon, the truck was packed. I closed the garage one last time, pocketed the remote, and slipped it onto the stack with the envelope. The house was silent, empty, but not mournful, like it had already forgotten us. I drove away without looking back. She had wished me gone. She had whispered those words into the phone like a curse, never thinking they'd come true. But now the house was sold, the furniture documented, the papers signed. By the time she came back from her make-believe yoga class, she'd find the life she mocked stripped bare, her wish carved into reality. It didn't matter what she said, what she begged, what she tried to salvage. The man she thought she controlled was already gone, vanished into the horizon. And for the first time in years, I felt free. Jenna came home just after 7, hair damp from a shower that hadn't been taken at the gym, yoga mat slung over her shoulder like a prop. She breezed into the kitchen humming, set her purse on the counter, and opened the fridge. Leftovers in a plastic container hit the microwave, buttons beeped, and she drifted upstairs to change. She didn't notice the missing truck. She didn't notice the bare corners where 12 boxes had stood. She didn't notice the stillness. Not yet. It was only after her dinner was half eaten that she spotted the manila envelope on the kitchen island. Her fork clattered against the plate. She pulled the papers out slowly, confusion spreading across her face, then disbelief, then fear. Divorce. Her name in black and white, and then the flash drive. She slid it into her laptop. My voice never came through, just hers. Clear, sharp, undeniable. I can't stand him anymore. I wish Griffin would just vanish so I could be with Roland forever. Her hand flew to her mouth, eyes wide. She hit pause, but the silence that followed was worse. She played it again, as if repetition might change the words. Didn't. Each time, her betrayal filled the kitchen until even she couldn't deny what she'd said. And then she saw the note, my handwriting blunt as a hammer. Consider your wish granted. The first knock came 10 minutes later. 2 strangers stood on the porch. Middle-aged couple, papers in hand, polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Mrs. Ward? We're the new owners. Papers closed today. We'll be moving in tomorrow morning. Jenna blinked, mouth open. No, you must be mistaken. They weren't. She read the documents twice before the truth hit. The house wasn't hers anymore. It wasn't even mine. It belonged to them. They gave her until tomorrow to be gone. She shut the door on them, heart racing, and grabbed her phone. The first call was to her sister, who had always sworn Griffin was too steady, too boring. The voicemail picked up. The second call was to her mother, straight to voicemail. A text came back an hour later, sharp and cold. You've embarrassed us enough. Don't call again. Panic growing, she dialed Roland. He answered, voice flat. Roland, it's me. Griffin's gone. It's just us now. You said. He cut her off. Slow down. No, listen, we can finally be together. The house is gone, he's out of the picture. We can. Jenna, he said firmly. We were never going to be together. You knew that. Her breath hitched. What are you talking about? You were fun. A distraction. But you're messy now. Griffin's recording, divorce papers, all this drama? I don't need it. We're done. The line went dead. She called back. Straight to voicemail. Called again. Blocked. By midnight, she was pacing the kitchen floor, hair tangled, mascara streaked down her cheeks. The microwave tray still held her half-eaten dinner, cold and congealed. Every number she dialed rang hollow. Friends who suddenly weren't available, family that wouldn't answer, Roland's silence cutting deepest of all. Her entire safety net unraveled in hours. The house is gone. The husband is gone. The lover is gone. Even the family she once leaned on to mock me had turned away. She sank onto the kitchen floor, clutching the divorce papers to her chest, rocking like a child. The recording played again and again on her laptop, her own voice taunting her. I can't stand him anymore. I wish Griffin would just vanish. By dawn, the house was no longer a home. Boxes sat by the door, packed in panic, random clothes and shoes crammed inside. The knock came again, firmer this time. The new owners were ready to move in. Jenna had nowhere to go, and that was the cost of her wish. She hadn't just lost me. She'd lost everything tethered to the life she thought was hers. While Jenna sobbed on the kitchen floor in Boise, I was already 600 miles north, my truck heavy with 12 boxes and a future she'd never touch. Missoula greeted me the way Montana always does. Sky stretched wide, mountains jagged and unforgiving, air sharp enough to remind you you're alive. I parked in front of a small cabin that had sat empty for years, a leftover from my grandfather's line. The roof needed patching, the porch sagged, and the wood stove smoked more than it burned. But it was mine. Untouched, unclaimed, and far enough from Boise that Jenna couldn't reach me even if she tried. I unpacked slowly, methodically. My grandfather's tools came out first. Chisels dulled by time, saws still steady in the hand. I set them on the workbench in the garage like sacred relics, each one humming with memory. It didn't matter that the cabin was drafty, that the bed creaked, that the fridge barely hummed. For the first time in years, I felt like the ground under me was solid. Within a week, word had spread. Missoula doesn't care about who you were. They care about what you can do. And what I could do was build. Tables, chairs, cabinets. I put up a sign, Ward Woodworks, and before the paint dried, a local cafe owner came knocking. She wanted a set of oak tables to replace her wobbly metal ones. Cash in hand, no questions asked. The first commission nearly broke me. Not because it was hard, because it was pure. Sawdust filled the air, wood shavings curled at my feet, and for 12 straight hours I shaped oak into something that would last longer than lies. I delivered the tables myself, loaded into the back of my truck. When she set coffee cups on them the next morning, her smile was worth more than any apology Jenna could have begged for. By the end of the month, I had a waiting list. Word spreads fast in small towns. Folks respected the work, not the man behind it. They didn't ask about Boise, about Jenna, about the wreckage I'd left behind. They cared about steady hands and honest craft. That was enough. Nights were quiet. No buzzing phone. No staged yoga classes. Just the crackle of the wood stove, the whistle of wind through pine, the steady rhythm of tools against timber. Silence became my sweetest companion, proof that I hadn't just left her. I'd left the noise of betrayal itself. Sometimes, sitting on the porch with a beer in hand, I'd think about her, about the kitchen where she mocked me, the phone pressed to her ear, her voice dripping contempt. And then I'd look at the mountains, immovable, eternal, and remember that her words no longer mattered. She'd wanted me gone, and now I was, not broken, not defeated, reborn in a place she'd never dare follow. The funny thing about starting over is that it doesn't feel like revenge while you're doing it. It feels like survival. But make no mistake, every table I built, every commission I delivered, every sunrise I watched over Missoula was revenge in its purest form. Silent, patient, absolute. She had mocked my craft, my routines, my boring little shop. Yet it was the very thing that saved me. It gave me dignity. It gave me purpose. And it gave me the freedom she could never have taken from me. She wanted me to vanish. Instead, I became untouchable. 2 years later, Jenna lived in a cramped apartment that smelled faintly of mildew and reheated noodles. The walls were thin enough that she could hear the neighbor's TV through the plaster, late-night sitcom laughter mocking her silence. The life she once strutted through like a queen had shriveled to 4 tired rooms and a balcony overlooking a parking lot. The yoga blog she started after the divorce was supposed to be her ticket out, her reinvention. For a few months she posted filtered photos of herself in borrowed leggings, stretching in poses she barely knew. Hashtags piled under every shot. At first, the likes trickled in. Then they dried up. The comments turned cruel. And finally, silence. No one cared. The account died the way all her ventures did, half-committed, forgotten. Roland was long gone. The last she heard, he had moved to Portland, married a woman 10 years younger, and opened a wine bar with her family's money. When Jenna sent him a message, Just one, desperate, asking if he remembered their time together. There was no reply, just the sting of being blocked again. Her family kept their distance, too. The shame of her divorce had stuck like a scar. Her mother still muttered about the embarrassment you caused us whenever Jenna tried to reach out. Friends she once bragged to at wine nights now crossed the street when they saw her downtown. She'd burned every bridge the moment she mocked the man who had carried her through years of struggle. Nights were the hardest. She would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying that recording in her head, the one she never actually got back but could never forget. Her own voice, sharp and careless. "I can't stand him anymore. I wish Griffin would just vanish so I could be with Roland forever." Sometimes she whispered it out loud, as if testing the shape of the words, as if maybe they had been taken out of context. But deep down, she knew. She had spoken to them. She had meant them, and they had come true in a way that destroyed her. Bills piled up. The job she took at a local spa barely covered rent, and every month she had to choose between groceries and gas. The jewelry Roland once gave her was pawned, one piece at a time, until nothing sparkled in her drawer but cheap knockoffs. The silk scarf, the gold bracelet, the emerald pendant. All gone, sold for pennies compared to the price she had paid to wear them. The cruel irony was clear even to her. She had traded a man who built a life with his hands for one who tossed her aside when the fun ended. She had mocked Griffin's stability, his boring little shop. But in the end, it was his steadiness that had carried her through 15 years of storms. She threw it away for a fantasy that collapsed the moment reality touched it. Sometimes, when the loneliness pressed too heavy, she'd scroll through old photos. Holidays at the cabin, birthdays at the oak table, vacations they'd saved for penny by penny. She'd see Griffin smiling, sawdust still in his hair, and for a moment she felt the weight of what she had lost. Not the man she betrayed, but the man she had never truly known. The decline wasn't dramatic. It was slow, grinding, inevitable. Every year a little less money, a little less beauty, a little less hope. Until finally, Jenna Ward became invisible. Not the woman who once hummed with new jewelry on her wrist, but a tired shadow sitting in a dim apartment, wondering how she had managed to throw away the foundation of her life. And that was the cruelest part. Griffin hadn't shouted, hadn't fought, hadn't humiliated her in public. He had simply vanished, leaving her with the weight of her own choices. The collapse wasn't his revenge, it was hers. By the time 2 years had passed, my workshop in Missoula carried a waiting list 6 months long. Word had spread Ward Woodworks wasn't just another craftsman's shop. It was a place where every table, every chair, every carved line carried honesty in its grain. Folks came from 3 states over, cash in hand, to take home something built to last. Life had settled into a rhythm I didn't know I'd needed. Work during the day, dinner on the porch at night, the smell of pine and cedar trailing me like an old friend. No lies, no whispers, just wood, tools, and silence. It was during a delivery that I met Claire, a widow, early 50s, with a quiet strength in her eyes. She'd ordered a walnut desk for her son, a piece he could take with him to college. When I brought it in, she touched the surface gently, like it was something sacred. "You don't just build furniture," she said. "You build memory." We started slowly, coffee at the cafe, walks down by the river, evenings spent talking about books and the strange ways grief reshapes a person. She wasn't flashy and wasn't trying to impress. She valued kindness. She valued honesty. 2 things I'd almost forgotten could exist in a woman. One evening, as the sun dropped behind the mountains, Claire asked the question I knew was coming. "Do you ever miss her?" I didn't flinch. I set my beer down, leaned back in the chair I'd built myself, and answered the only way I knew how. "I miss who I thought she was, but that woman never existed." Claire nodded, no judgment in her eyes, just understanding. The lesson was carved into me deeper than any piece of cherrywood I'd ever shaped. Love without respect is just a house built on sand. Collapses the moment the tide comes in. And when it collapses, you don't rebuild the same house, you build stronger, wiser, higher. Jenna had wished me gone, and I had granted it. But the true revenge wasn't in the papers, the sale, or even her collapse into obscurity. The true revenge was this. Sitting on a porch in Montana with sawdust still clinging to my boots, a woman beside me who valued the man I was, and a life Jenna would never again touch. The greatest revenge is freedom. And I had it.
Subscribe and stay one step ahead of cheaters. And trust me, the next story makes this one look like a fairy tale.